from lunch, everybody. So we're kicking off this afternoon with, what was it, tagging, isn't it, in a hybrid IT world. So really interesting stuff of linking some of the theoretical stuff into some more practical things. Rory is here to talk to us. Rory has his own business, Sam Charter, so that is who you are presenting as today, isn't it, Rory?
Yes, yes, a man of many hats.
So all interesting stuff, and I'm sure you will engage us all in interesting conversation, Rory.
Yes, yeah, well, to that point, I think I've only got 9 slides, so we might need some tap dancing and jokes, so but we'll see how we get on. So welcome everybody, and thank you for your time. I appreciate that you could have been next door, so I am grateful. We'll just run through what the agenda is actually going to look like. So we are talking about tagging in a hybrid environment, and the reason I've picked this as a topic, Yada highlighted that the ISO certification that goes on is overseen or governed by a body called Working Group 21, and some months ago, I'm trying to think, nearly 2 years ago now, they approached me to head up the -7 initiative. So Yada talked quite eloquently on -2, 3, 5, and 11, and 1, obviously, and 1. But there is a -7 in there as well, which is looking to create a technical paper around the management of tags in an IT estate. Now, of course, time has moved on since that tagging initiative first kicked off many moons ago. So that's why I've sought to create a presentation on tagging in a hybrid environment, because it's a cold day in hell when you go into an organisation and they're all in the cloud. Well, first off, we're going to address why tagging, why you need to tag in the first place. We're going to look at Sam and our technology weave as well. So this is how I squared the circle of how tags would reasonably be used in an IT estate. And we're going to dive into a little qualification of some of the ISO standards. We're not going to go into any great technical depth because I don't have that level of knowledge, but just to give you an idea of where the ISO is going with tagging. Then we're going to have a look at the cloud approach as well, because that is quite a departure from the ISO approach, and factors to consider when creating a tagging taxonomy, because we have to bring this together. The approaches are quite different. And the final use case that we need to highlight, particularly in the hybrid environment, is, if you haven't heard of it already, where's Di? Is Di in the room? Sat v Diageo, because that went to the court case. So why tag? Well, from an ISO perspective, primarily all of these tagging initiatives were set up to help with the topic of recognition. There was a time in SAM, and it only seems like yesterday, Stu, that you could throw SCCM agents out on the IT estate and would pull back a whole load of data that was readable by SCCM, but didn't mean a whole heap to the humans who were actually sort of digesting and using the data. So the initiative was spawned within Working Group 21 to be able to get a machine-readable and human-readable tag, an XML tag in this instance, that would identify what the software actually was that was installed. The idea was that you would place the tag adjacent to the installation. Your SAM suite would then grab that information and then reconcile the identification of that software to the tag data, rather than having to labour it itself. When I was asked to sort of head up this sort of -7 tagging initiative, one of the first things that came to mind is I've done a bit of reading around FinOps. Are there any sort of FinOps practitioners in the room? Maybe. As the SAM discipline has moved on from that sort of SCCM recognition issue that we had many moons ago to the present day, the SAM suites have got very good at recognising software, so the problem has become less of a problem. And at that point, do we really need the tags then at that point? And that is where Working Group 21 is at the moment, because it hasn't, shall we say, kept up with the technology.
Sorry, Rory, just to chat. So are we talking about that from a licensing perspective, or a thing? So, you know, a licensing perspective, I care whether I've got SQL Server 2016 or 2019 But as an asset, I want to know whether it's service pack 1, 2, 3 or 4.
Yes. Yeah, you want to, I guess it depends on the level of detail you want to take it to.
Yeah, but the tagging goes down to that level of the service packs rather than just the product and addition.
They can do, yeah. Because
Right.
one of the things that one of the initiatives that Working Group 21 were hoping to do was to be able to put this sort of schema in front of software vendors, and they go, "Oh, thanks very much, ISO. That's wonderful. We're going to take this and we're going to roll out all these tags with all our software to greatly aid recognition." And of course, that didn't happen, did it? So at this point, it becomes, shall we say, a voluntary exercise. But what you can do, because it is an open standard after all, that schema is available. That schema you can take yourself. So if you want to tag those given instances because they are super important to you for terms of recognition, you can go ahead and do that. All you need is a notepad, and you can create it yourself then at that point. So what do I mean by SAM and our technology weave? Any service management people in the room? No? Okay. They're being very quiet if they are.
Next door.
Yeah. They're all So what do I mean by SAM and the technology weave? So what I want you to do is, if you indulge me slightly, these bars represent those IT services that you see at the top of the screen there. These are technology stacks. And that is how IT has been presented to the business since probably year dot, since ITIL came out anyway, and they grabbed the high ground, and that's fair enough. That's good enough because the business wants to know that those technology stacks are working and working well and serving the business. What the business also wants to know is total cost of ownership and return on investment against those IT services. Now, unfortunately, SAM has an east to west view of the IT estate. So that when it tots up all the Microsoft installations on the IT estate, it arrives at a compliance picture, which is great, but you put that in front of a lot of people in senior management and they go, so what? Whereas if you were in a position to tag all the software that sat in the payroll function, you would then be in a position to say the TCO for the payroll IT service is X, Y, or Z. So that's where we are. Now, in having gone through that tagging approach and that tagging methodology, what you'll start to find is that there are going to be some installations that you may not have tagged, which is great because that sort of alludes to the idea that it might be shadow IT, because you've not got round to actually identifying those installations that support a given IT service. So it means you can get sort of Sam Spade, put the hat on and say, what do we really need or use this for? So it really supports the idea that we can potentially purge the IT estate off the back of going down a tagging taxonomy. The particular problem with tags is that they are, I don't know, that there is a manual overhead to maintaining them. And whilst there might be a great attraction to taking business data in the customizable fields of a -2 tag, for example, what you're going to find is if you start populating data that is fluid in nature, your overhead to maintain the tag and its accuracy is going to go through the roof. So that is an argument that was pitched by Steve O'Halloran, who resides in Canada. If any of you know Asset Labs over in Canada there, he's very much an advocate for having primary key data in those tags. So you might have request ID. Because I don't know if anybody like myself has consulted in, say, financial institutions, if you go into their data center and you say, what about that bit of software on that server over there? Who owns it? What are you using it for? They go, I don't know, I don't care, but I'm not switching it off because the sky could fall in. And they don't want to just, go back off.
So picking up on what you're saying about service management mentality, is the config management people, are they not the big drivers that should be behind this for understanding what's involved in the payroll service and how it all links together?
Yes, absolutely. But the idea of following the tagging approach is, say, for example, when that payroll IT service was first stood up, the architects came up with the design and said, this is what it looks like. The idea of having a tagged approach is that over the life cycle of that payroll service, you then append tags to additional software that might actually support the payroll function, or the CRM function, or the ERP, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Because that changes over time. It doesn't stay the same as the design as it first came through. So I just want to offer some sort of guidance on the ISO approach, and this was where I sort of, me and Steve and a guy called Ben Strickland threw the grenade in the room. The ID tags -2, that's what they are. They help recognise software, and as I said, you can get them crafted by software vendors. There's not too many that do them these days. I think Cisco is very hot on using tags. They're supreme advocates of it, but they are the exception to the rule. Microsoft were a fan back in the day, but I think as somebody alluded to in the room, that was when Heather Young was an advocate for it, and she's moved on. Then we have entitlement tags as well. So these are equivalent tags that help you craft IDs that will identify what entitlements you have to enable you to compare them to the installations or the -2 tags. And then you have the resource utilization tags as well. So there's certain software types that will require you to provide data over and above a basic installation for use and consumption of a license. So that's the idea of the -4 tags. That's where they help you. And then we have the -6 tags for hardware asset management. Now that standard hasn't yet been published. It's very close to being published. As Yada rightly highlighted, -5 is the glossary or appendix or terminology ISO paper in the 19770, and I think we've got here the 19770-7 is going to be a paper around how you use tags, so that this could be the kernel of that paper.
When you say not yet live, is there drafts available, or is it still very much a work in progress?
Very much a work in progress, as much because there was talk about starting crafting some of this, but then that's when I came in new, fresh-eyed to the situation and said, A, who's using all of this, really? Are we just designing the last buggy whip? And indeed, can we really talk about creating a tagging taxonomy that doesn't accommodate the cloud? Because you wouldn't use these in the cloud.
So that there's opportunity for industry people to get involved and voice an opinion on this. It's not a standard as of yet, so therefore it's still up in the air to be debated.
Totally. So what I would say is, if you are keen and willing, we're always looking for fresh blood. So if you want to become part of Working Group 21 and contribute to the, shall we say, the tagging taxonomy initiative, then please reach out, get in touch, and I'll make that happen. That's not a problem. The only one we haven't touched on here, well, that's it, because these things run on and on. Coincidentally, is -8. So this will be one for you as well, Yada. If an organisation develops a piece of work that is in alignment with 19770-1, they can get that accredited to say that it is aligned against 19770-1. I don't think we have it on here, do we? No. I told you we'd be ripping through these. I didn't think I was going to be quite so quick. So yeah, if you do have thoughts, opinions, please shout, by the way. The metadata approach, what we're looking to do with cloud, on the other hand, cloud and FinOps is back at that situation where Sam was 10 to 15 years ago, where they're getting masses of data from AWS, from Azure, and then they're getting a dirty, rotten figure at the bottom of all that data saying, you owe us this large amount of money here. And what a business wants to do is to have that sort of recognition around where the budget and where the responsibility lies for that figure being so large. Now, what you can do in these platforms is then associate this tag data to the installations that comprise those IT services, for example, that we mentioned on the previous slide. So you can start to, for payroll, you can put a lot of those technologies potentially against HR, and then the slice of the bill that is associated with that HR payroll function can be apportioned out to HR to say, you need to pay this each month. Or equally, that's the chargeback option. You can have a showback option as well. So you can still have that idea where IT pays for everything centrally, but then they might come to HR and say, is this appropriate? Is this the right amount of money that we should be paying for this service? And there's technical aspects to that IT service that IT could offer grounds for refinement. But equally, HR could have a view on it. So, for example, it could be that they bought client licenses for 5,000 employees. We've just had a cull of employees. We only need to pay for 3,500. Those kind of sort of business scenarios. And I believe you can have anything up to 50 tags per installation as well in the cloud. Yeah, it's variable on the platform, but I've got 50 in my head from somewhere, so yeah. So that's how tagging is done in the cloud. Now, there's a couple of things to say about tagging here in the cloud. It's case sensitive. So you tend to find into an organisation that doesn't have the structure or the rigour in place is that a lot of the tags that are created will be DevOps people just throwing in any old sort of malarkey that makes sense to them at the time, but may not make sense to the wider business. So having that structure and rigour in place to say, these are the tagging standards that we have and this is how we follow them and deploy them in an organisation is going to be vital if you want to be able to subdivide that information in a means that makes sense to the accountancy.
Sorry, excuse me, what am I actually tagging in the cloud? So am I tagging that I've got something deployed in AWS, Azure, or...
This could be SQL. That could be that SQL instance that you talked about there earlier. But that SQL instance forms part of a wider technology stack that forms part of the payroll.
Trackable item.
Yeah, but you're tagging stuff that you've deployed, so it's not software, so it's not a Salesforce instance or something like that that's not running on my platform.
The only way, I haven't really addressed SaaS in this.
Right.
Yeah. So this is very much AWS and Azure and G-Cloud. That's that approach. But yeah, you can get quite creative with these. You know, you just add a tag and another one pops up, and highlighting an area of development is really handy. One thing I'm working with somebody on creating another sort of process kit. Strangely enough, the thing about tagging is if your services spring up or spring down, there are some elements of the services that cannot be tagged. So you can't tag IP addresses, you can't tag storage, because there's nothing physically to place it against necessarily. So what people have tended to do is to create phantom tags, and you place your storage tag next to the most adjacent technology to that storage. And it's a real thing to watch out for, because if you collapse that service and you're looking to save money because you no longer require it, people too often forget about the data that sits behind the service, and it's still generating money for Amazon and for Microsoft. So it's a thing to watch out for.
Sorry, can I throw in a random question there? So some VMs, right, they kind of ephemeral, right? They get spun up and then they die, and then they get spun up and then they die, right?
Yeah.
So is there a best practice how to account for that? Because I mean, you can't every single time add a tag on something that's going to die, maybe in 10 minutes or in 1 hour, or unless you create some automated process.
Well, where you go with this is typically if you were to look at it in a SAM environment and you would think this is the manual process and this is what we do. Mm-hmm. If you're doing it in the cloud, what you do is you'd set up automated scripts to do it for you. Because you're right, there are services that are up and down, and trying to keep ahead of them or keep up with them, you'd never see daylight. Yeah. So factors to consider then when creating a tagging taxonomy. As I mentioned there, certain items cannot be tagged. So when you, for example, I put IP addresses up there. When you buy a typical EC2 instance on Amazon, it comes with 5 I think they're called semi-flexible IP addresses per compute instance, because if you associate web pages or email boxes with those IP addresses, they want to give you that flexibility that it's not just one web page or it's one mailbox. It's giving you that flexibility. You may not need all 5. So that's a conversation to have with AWS there. And we've touched on the storage already. That's really important to make sure that you get a proper grip on things, not just from the point of view of cost, but also from the point of location of data as well. There's a thing too around clouds where the volume of the data drives the bill, which is seemingly obvious, but also the frequency of you writing up and down to that data location drives the bill. So if you're in a foreign exchange, or a high turnover of data scenario, you want to make sure you're on the right package. But if you're sort of transacting mortgages, there doesn't need to be sort of quite the pace of writing, perhaps there. As I touched on already, tagging in the cloud is case sensitive, so don't assume that everybody is going to be touch type perfect when it comes to creating these tags. Do have that sense of due diligence to make sure that you filter out any tags that don't meet the schema that you've set up. And I think that's the best way to do it, because I think if you try and go to the cloud and start hunting for these things that either A, aren't tagged, or B, are incorrectly tagged, you could be there a while. So if you pull a report that says something is incorrectly tagged, it'll pop up straight away for you. This is an important one too. Have a governance model or tagging taxonomy in place that sits across both environments as well. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, it's a rarity that an organisation will be 100% in the cloud. So that if you've thought that we're going to divide our cloud data by cost centre or by budget, make sure you've got a mechanism in place to do that for the on-prem stuff as well. We've touched somewhat on the data side of life. Absolutely, you want to make sure that you're dovetailing your tagging strategy with where you're keeping your data. Ultimately, your data is your, potentially your most valuable asset in an organisation. So making sure that you don't sort of create orphans or islands of data in the cloud is equally very important. So standing up and down services should include any data behind those IT services as well. And as I mentioned, their tag data should be of a primary key standard. So by that I mean if you were putting it on a -2 tag, data on a -2 tag, what you want to do is write once and forget. You don't want to be in a position where you're having to go back and change it all the time. So I was thinking about this the other night because it's great to know product owners. And product owners are typically people, but people churn through companies. If you're in a position whereby you can put somebody's job role in there, or potentially somebody's unique identifier for the job role that they occupy, then that would work far better than putting John Smith in there and hoping that John stays forever and a day. So the one thing I wanted to bring to our attention as well, and I'm a huge fan of this business case, is that hybrid environment where you have certain scenarios where on-prem technology could talk to cloud technology or vice versa, is where organisations fall foul of licensing and consumption. Do I have any? I just have some graphics there, good. Okay, so that's all right, don't have to worry about what's coming up next. So has anybody heard this story already? I'm sure some of you will in the room. Yeah, there's lots of nods there going on. Okay, so for some of you, for the blank faces as it were, what happened was many moons ago, Diageo did some research on their drinks productions facilities and found that it was peaking and troughing. And they wanted to smooth out that production curve. And what they did was some business and systems analysis and found out that those peaks and troughs were being caused by the call centre operations, which were working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So the plan then was to do away with the call centres, put a web-based front end on their CRM, and then provide a utility for CRM to talk to SAP and generate the honour the orders that were passed through from the CRM. Now, SAP sort of tapped Diageo on the shoulder and said, you do realise, of course, that we charge per user, as well as charging per everything else, because that's the way SAP work. And Diageo came back and said, well, we've paid for that bridge between our CRM and SAP. It doesn't matter how many people cross, we paid, we're good, thanks very much, but we love the call. SAP reminded them, oh no, you do pay. You do pay. And it went on for about 2 or 3 years, and I think SAP had a bad couple of quarters and decided, right, let's go to court with this. Now, what I found fascinating about Di's presentation this morning, when he was talking about court and how things get fractured so quickly in the world of IT, obviously SAP had done their homework, because what they did was they went in and they said to the court that every user from the CRM was a professional user. Jedi rights on the SAP platform. So they were going in at £14,000 per license. When in reality, of course, a lot of these people on the CRM were like, data entry level, £400 per user. But that's a strategy, and it's something to bear in mind, that when a vendor takes you to court, they're always going to pitch high, rather like an audit, and have the judge chip down, as opposed to go low and hope the judge bumps them up. The judge found in favour of SAP and awarded them £63 million plus backdata support and maintenance. All because what you could have done was tagged that connector, and all of a sudden you've got 2 services that come together, and somebody should have sort of twigged, hang on a minute, we're granting users of one system access to the features and benefits of another. But they didn't take that data or that information forward. That story doesn't end there, because what SAP then did, and this is the bit that perhaps not as many people know, they looked west and saw who else operates like this in such a fashion in the drinks industry, and hit Budweiser. And they hit Budweiser to the tune of 565 million. Now, Budweiser, being, shall we say, US-based and experts in law, put their arms around SAP and said, nothing to see here, thanks very much, we love SAP. There'll be no further comment. Somebody did some forensic accounting in the IT budget and found a one-time spike to the tune of $270 million that couldn't be explained. I would have loved to have been that lawyer on commission for that matter. Can you imagine? So where again, and that would have benefited Budweiser, having that tag to identify that we've got a cross of services, we should be, reviewing the licensing and making sure that, our architectural solution supports the licenses is absolutely vital. So I've got a section here on SAM and ITAM and FinOps. Am I right for time? Am I okay? I'm doing okay. Okay. The reason I have that image up there, anybody know what it is? Fabergé egg. Well done, Andrea. Do you know the cost of it? The cost?
Couple of million.
Not bad. 84,000.
That's a big one. Sold.
The reason I have this up here is that, and this is an extension of the information that tagging can provide us, of course, is that tagging will give us in FinOps. Anybody know the sculptor? Well done. We've got some quizzes. Maybe we've just got some quizzes in the room. Who knows? But yes,
Nice.
what you're going to find is that FinOps is going to chip away and chisel away at a given technology stack and a cost at a point in time. So it's going to rough hew the shape, the edges, and it's going to buff here and it's going to chip away there. Whereas SAM tends to work, if we produce an ELP, it's akin to a work of art. And we need to sort of break away from that ELP approach if we're going to manage costs in the cloud. And we take that tagging data and we make use of it. Now, and it's amazing how this all comes full circle, and we talk about plan, do, check and act, yeah? If we plan, do, check and act here, our plan, do, check and act cycle is going to be days or weeks at a time. Because if you sit on the information here, the time you take to make a final decision to do anything in the cloud is money burnt, and that's OPEX spend. So you're impacting the bottom line, so that needs to move much quicker. This, on the other hand, is CapEx spend. Now you can recycle in this area and you can get a tighter definition of what you need for your next contract through recycling and rationalisation, but it's cost avoidance, which is not so sexy in the accounting world. But all of that can be enhanced with tagging data and reslicing that financial data to support business decisions.